well, what does your wife think about it? My wife loves me, all right? We'll just kind of leave it at that. So every morning when I wake, I did have a nightmare one time. I woke up a few weeks ago and I had this vivid dream that my beard was gone. And it was like, oh my God. When I woke up, first thing I done was this, because I thought, man, Sonia done trimmed it off in the middle of the night. This thing is gone. My daughters, for some reason, they absolutely love it. They think it's the greatest thing. I don't know, but I'm going to go down to Austin, Texas, Labor Day weekend. We're going to go down there, and we're competing in a beard competition. So something fun. We look for stuff to do that's kind of crazy, so that's what we're doing. You may see me next year. I may be clean shaven again. I used to keep a goatee about like Tony, so he can tell you. He's known me for a long time. But so this is what you've got. I'm excited to be here. Your pastor called me this week and asked if I would come, and I said absolutely honored to come. So this morning we're going to talk about the only thing that matters. And in Galatians 5 it says this, it says, "For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision availeth for anything, but faith which worketh by love." Another translation puts it this way, it says, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. So if we take that and twist it and put it in modern text, for what Paul was telling us, he'd tell us the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. I brought a video. Let's take a look at that this morning. Well, it's my kind of Coke machine, right? So I've been excited before when you put your money in and it's dispensed 2. Anybody ever had that happen? Drop 2 out on you? You're like, man, this is a great day, right? So I can only imagine something like that happening. When that video goes off, it asks this question. It says, so where will happiness strike next? Where will happiness strike next? And what if the answer to that was wherever you go? Wherever you live and wherever you are, that's where happiness will strike next. Because wherever you go, that's where Jesus is, and wherever you go, that's where His church is, and wherever you go, that's where love is. Because the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. I don't know a lot of things, but I know that we live in a dark time, in a dark world. There's a lot of darkness around us, and it's important that the world hears that message. But it's more important that the world sees that message. So we can talk a good talk, right? But you got to show sometimes. You got to put it out there and show what you're talking about. How often do you hear, or how often are you seeing faith express itself in love? I hope that you see it every day. I hope that you're part of that every day. There's a lot of things that go on around the globe that bother me. There's a lot of things that I see in the news that I read about that trouble me. Things about, such as We hear about school shootings, active terrorism, right? All this stuff that goes on. This country with nuclear capabilities, all this stuff that goes on and bothers me, and it's troubling, right? From protesters, from people on Facebook and Twitter and with all kinds of negative comments and posts. That kind of stuff bothers me. That kind of stuff troubles me when I see it, when I read it, when it goes on. And all I can tell you is that we live in a dark world. And we're living in a world that needs the light, right? It needs the light. And who is the light? We're the light. What are you doing about that? I hope that you're part of the solution, right? I hope that you find yourself part of that solution, because the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. In the book of Exodus, we can see another dark time. All of you are very familiar with it. The children of Israel, they're being held captive. They're being held as slaves there in the land of Egypt. And Moses is being directed by God. And he's going to Pharaoh, and he's pleading with Pharaoh. He says, Pharaoh, you got to let my people go. And, of course, Pharaoh's like, sure, no problem, Moses. Take them and go on, right? No. Why isn't he doing that? Because he's got all this great labor, right? That's how all the pyramids are built and all this stuff is happening with all this free labor that he has. So Pharaoh is less than excited about getting rid of that, right? About losing all that. So he's not having it, and we know what happens is God begins to unleash a series of plagues. So God goes, and what's the first one that he does? He turns the water into blood. And I don't know if you put a lot of thought in this, but I try to really, really think about what's taking place. And we think, well, he turned the water into blood. Maybe the Nile just ran with blood. Well, it's more than that, right? It's any water that they had stored up. It's any little creek, any little stream that was around. Every bit of it turned to blood. And whenever you have to have water to survive, that's a big deal, right? Whenever you go and you open up your jug that you have for your daily water, and guess what? It's now blood. That's a problem. When your main water source that's flowing through the country is now blood, that's a problem. So God's stepping it up. He's showing them that who's in control. Well, that didn't get his attention, so then he goes up another one, and he releases these frogs. And all these frogs go crazy. I mean, there's frogs everywhere. You pull back your bed, and there's frogs in your bed. There's frogs in your cupboard. I mean, they're everywhere. And the Bible tells us at the end of that plague that there was heaps and heaps of frogs. Now, that's good if you're having frog legs, right? But it's not so good if you don't have the oil to fry them. So they didn't have the, all this capability going on. So this heaps and heaps of all these frogs going around. And just imagine the stench of that, right? As it begins to permeate throughout the land of Egypt. The smell of all these dead frogs. Because the Egyptians, they were going out and they were gathering all these and they were dumping them in just mounds and mounds. We don't really think about it sometimes, but just to associate yourself, put yourself there and think about the smell that was going on. Well, that wasn't enough to get Pharaoh's attention. He thought, well, that's all right. That's over with, right? Get back to normal. God unleashes the gnats and the flies, and it says that there were so many that they were like dust of the air. Now, all of us have seen a dust storm, right? You've all seen a dust storm. You imagine having that many gnats and flies around? I mean, I get mad if there's just one in the house, right? Much less enough that it looks like dust everywhere. But God set that in motion as well. That wasn't enough to get his attention. So then he steps it up, and then he goes in and he takes care of livestock, and he begins to kill off their livelihood. So he's affecting their income, right? He's affecting what they rely upon to sustain life. So he begins to kill off the livestock, and it says bulls show up on man and beast. So he's affecting their health as well. All this comes in play as we see this. And then a mighty hailstorm rains down. It's a hailstorm unlike they've never seen before. And if you're a farmer, what you don't want to see, if you've got a crop in the field, you don't want to hear the weatherman say, there's a hailstorm coming. Because it's fixing to do a lot of damage to your field. It's fixing to destroy what you've worked hard into planting and to getting ready. So this mighty hailstorm comes. It begins to beat down and destroy everything that they had planted, all the stuff that was growing up. And if that wasn't enough, then the locusts show up. And the locusts show up and they begin to just devour whatever's left, right? They're eating up whatever's left. So you just imagine all this going on in Egypt, all these things going on. And Pharaoh's he's sticking to his guns. He's not giving in. He's not letting Pharaoh take God's people out. So he unleashes this ninth plague. And, eventually takes 10 plagues, but we're going to look at the ninth one this morning before Pharaoh would eventually give in and say, just get out, right? So this ninth plague in Exodus 10:21, it says this. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did one another rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. So I don't know if you caught that or not, but it says the Egyptians for 3 days, they were in total darkness. They were in a darkness to be felt. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty dark. It said they didn't get out, right? Because why? Because they couldn't see where they were going. They sat in their house and they couldn't see each other. So I began to think, what does that look like? And what popped to mind? How many of you have been to Mammoth Cave? All right, so, okay, I started to say, so there's 4 of us that's been there. All right, so the rest of you had to participate, right? So you've been to Mammoth Cave, and you remember whenever you're on that cave tour, you come to a spot in the cave, and the park ranger says, all right, everybody gather in here, and if you would, just find yourself a seat and sit down, and we're going to show you how dark it is, right? We're going to show you how dark it is. So you're sitting there, and everybody's gathered, and they're seated, and they go over there, and they flip the light off. And it is dark, right? And you're thinking, well, how many of you done this? Well, I can surely see my hand, right? So you begin to put it up there, and you're like, and next thing you know, you're touching your face. So you can't see. I mean, you can't see anything, right? It's total darkness. To me, that's what a darkness to be felt would be like, would be in that kind of situation. So we see that, that kind of darkness in the land of Egypt. All the Egyptians had that kind of darkness. But then something happens. The park ranger says, all right, now you see how dark it is. Now we're going to show you what one candle will do, right? We're going to light one candle. So the park ranger strikes this match, lights this one candle, and then what happens? One little light, and you begin to see everything around you, right? This one little candle power begins to illuminate the whole cave, the whole area that you're seated in. You can see who's in front of you, beside you. You can see in front of you again. You can see your hands. It's a good day, right? You can see all this stuff that you once couldn't see. All this stuff that was once dark is now light from just one little light that's shining out in a dark place. When the last part of that text, it tells us that God's people had light. Although there was darkness that was all in the land of Egypt for 3 days, it wasn't the same circumstance for God's people. His people had light. You know why? Because in Him is no darkness. In Him is no darkness. That's why the children of Israel, they had light. They had light where they were at. And in John 1, it tells us this. It says, in Him was life, and the life was the light of man, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. See, Satan tried to put out the light on Calvary, right? He tried to say, all right, this is going to be it. I'm going to do away with the light forever. But Jesus had another plan. Even though He had Jesus executed on Calvary's cross, we know in 3 days He got up, He arose, and He says, you didn't put out the light. So the light still shines. It still shines. And God's calling you and I to be that same kind of light. He's calling you and I to be that kind of light. That's right, little old you shining in a dark world, shining in a place that is dark and dim. He wants you to shine in that kind of place. But there's a problem. There's a problem with doing that, and that problem is this. There's a lot of us that we're not shining very bright. There's a lot of us that associate ourselves as Christians, but our light isn't what it should be. And there's several reasons for that. There's several reasons why our light doesn't shine like it should. And, one of those is Satan's beat you down. Anybody been beat down by Satan? All of us here. So I know all of you here have been beat down by Satan at one point or another. You may be getting beat down by him even right now, even this past week. Some friends of ours have been going through it. My wife texted me something else that had happened. I said, man, that Satan's just all over them, right? So all this, Satan comes to us and he beats us down, and we become focused upon the day-to-day. Because whenever you're beat down, you're focused on the day-to-day, and we lose focus on the day to come. So we're more focused on the day-to-day and everything that's happening around about us, and we forget about the day to come, right? So Satan takes our mind off of what we're supposed to be doing. He takes our mind off. He's cluttered our minds with these things that are going around about us, these things that we're dealing with from day in and day out, and we forget about what our purpose is. We forget about what we should be doing, what we're supposed to be busy about doing. And whenever he's doing that, guess what happens? Our light gets dim. Our light gets dim. And it's difficult to meet with God when you've lost yourself. When Satan's beat you down and you've lost yourself, it's difficult to meet with God. Because if the light within you is darkness, that's a difficult place to meet God. because our lights begin to turn to darkness. And if you lose your passion, and Satan wants you to lose your passion, right? He doesn't want you to be passionate about the things of God. He doesn't want you to be passionate about the ministry. If you lose your passion, it's hard to locate God's presence. It's hard to locate His presence. So Satan knows what he's doing. He's good at what he does. So he knows every avenue to get to you. He knows all the right things to throw your way, all the right strings to pull, all the things that get under your skin, and he throws those at us day in and day out so that we become less focused on the day to come, and we're more focused upon right here and right now. So here's what we do. We begin to believe the lies of Satan, right? When he's whispering to us, he's telling us those things. He's telling us lies like you're useless, like you're worthless. He whispers lies to us like you're broken, you're no good. And pretty soon, here's what happens. Those lies begin to be what defines us. As we listen to the lies of Satan, those lies are what becomes our defining moment. It's what defines us as a person. And he gets us in the darkness of depression. He pulls us in the darkness of loneliness. He pulls us over in the darkness of hopelessness, into anger, into regret. That's his avenue. That's what he does. That's what he uses against us. Until it's like we're all alone in that dark cave, right? Like we're all alone. We're the only ones there. We can't see. We become so focused on the darkness that we forget about the light. The very light that guides us, we've forgotten about because of all these other lies that Satan's filtered into our mind. Rest assured, he doesn't want your light to shine. Satan doesn't want your light to shine. He doesn't want it to be effective. He doesn't want you to be doing those kind of things, because you know what happens whenever you let your light shine? Whenever you let your light shine, it begins to express faith, and it begins to show love. And something else that your light does, it begins to instill hope. And you know what hope does? Hope changes things. Hope changes things. So Satan doesn't want your light to shine because of those things. But Jesus has another plan, and he tells us, he says, you're a light. He says, you're a light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. But they put it on a stand, and it gives light into all the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Matthew 5. So he has another plan, God tells us. He says, hey, light your light. Set it up for everybody to see. A few years ago, 2014, I think it was, we like to do road trips for vacations, all right? So if you like road trips, you'd like to hike along with us. I mean, it's like 6 days, 2,500 miles. It's a lot of driving. We have a good time doing it. But we flew into Denver last 2014, rented a car, headed up to the Dakotas, Rushmore, across Montana, down to Yellowstone. It's just this big loop, right? Being a good husband and a good dad, what did I do? I fed the kids at Nashville before we boarded. It was lunchtime. And I said, hey, when we get outside of Denver, I'll stop and get something to eat, because I can maneuver through big city traffic. I don't like to, but I can do it. So if I don't have to, it's a better day. So I said, we get outside of the hustle and the bustle of the big city, we'll stop at a little place and wait, because in my mind, it's like, Brent, hey, we're going to be near Madisonville, right? So you can find something to eat there. But guess what happened? We got outside of Denver, and I'm going to tell you, there's nothing. Wasn't good. I wasn't very popular. So as the evening turned to night, began to see lights. And when you see lights, there's hope, right? And my wife's hungry. The girls are saying, when are we going to eat? We ate like 8 hours ago. Dad, when are we eating? So I said, hey, look, there's a city up there. There's a town up there. I'm sure that we can get something to eat. And we drove forever. But you know what? That city was set up on a hill, and it wasn't hidden, right? It was just like we're supposed to be. We're set up on a hill, and we're not to be hidden. And I knew that there was somewhere that we could find hope when we got there. It was something that we could find nourishment to get us on through the rest of our journey. And in the same way, Jesus says, don't hide your light. You're set up on a hill. You're a city up on a hill that all can see. Jesus tells us that we're that light of the world. We're a beacon of hope in a dark place. Just as a city on the hill can't be hidden, in the same way as church, when his church is united, his church can't be hidden. When His church bands together, His church cannot be hidden, because there's hope in a dark world. You know, as awesome as it is to have that single candle in a cave, it would be even more awesome if they handed everyone that was there a candle, right? Because then what happens? Then you've got an even bigger light. And that's what God has in store for His church. That's what He has in store for His church. He says, light it up, right? Light it up. Don't hide it. We need to be united. There's too much. Satan comes into our church and begins to tear us apart because he doesn't want God's church to be united. He doesn't want our church to be united. He wants it to be divided, right? He wants it to be have division, have conflict going on all the time. That's not what God had in store for us. You ever noticed, especially now during the summertime, you turn on your porch light, what happens? It attracts bugs, right? I was noticing that, and I was sitting here looking at the porch light, and you know what I noticed? I noticed that it attracts a lot of bugs. That it doesn't just attract one kind of bug, but it attracts all kinds of bugs, right? That there's all kinds of bugs that's showing up. There's big bugs, there's little bugs, there's young bugs, there's old bugs. I mean, they're just everywhere. There's just all kinds of these bugs showing up. And it reminded us, and so should His church be, right? His church should be attracting all kinds. It shouldn't just be attracting one kind. It shouldn't be just attracting this kind or that kind, but it should be attracting all kinds. All kinds of people. And I tell you, there's a lot of times that we get hung up whenever somebody comes in and they have jeans on. And you're like, what? I've been to places that if I showed up like this, I didn't have a tie on, man, you can forget. Or this, right? You forget about it. And Jesus talked about that a lot. He preached about that to the scribes and the Pharisees. He said, you focus upon the outside. You look at what's on the outside. You know what God looks at? What's on the inside. He sees what's on in the heart. And that's where our focus should be. And we shouldn't be focused upon what's on the outside or what's on the outward appearance. There's a pastor out of Louisville, and whenever we go to Louisville, a lot of times we'll go to his church, Southeast Christian Church. You guys ever heard of it? Kyle Heidemann. So anyway, you can look him up later. It's like the 5th biggest church in the country. And Kyle was downtown Louisville, and they were at this event, and one of the members of his church come up to him, one of the services, and says, hey, I thought that was just awesome, you witnessing to that guy that was all covered in tattoos. And Kyle's like, what? So he didn't say anything right away, and then he was trying to think back what was going on. Well, this guy that he was talking to, guess what? He was a youth minister at another church, right? But we stereotype, right? We look at people and we say, oh, well, they must be living a bad life. They must have this going on or that going on. This guy was serving God. That's what he was doing. He was about the kingdom work. But we're too focused upon color of skin, things up on our arms, what people look like, how they dress. That's the things that we're focused upon, right? God says, I'm not worried about it. I'm worried about what's right here. I'm worried about if your heart's good, if your heart's clean, if your heart's where it should be. That's what I'm looking at. So that's what our church should be about. It should be about drawing other people in. Because can I tell you something? Everybody has something to offer. Everybody has something to offer to God's work, to God's kingdom. And somebody that I could reach, maybe somebody that you can't reach. And somebody that you can reach, maybe somebody I can't reach. And it's all about those connections. It's all about reaching out. It's all about lighting up. It's all about bringing people in. I've been to a lot of churches that they don't like to include. They become more of a country club for the saints rather than a hospital for the sinners, right? They're more interested in excluding, right? Like, we're not going to do it that way. So when I came here this morning, I noticed you guys started off with a praise song. It's like, wow, that's good. There's a lot of churches like, we're not going to do that. It's Fran Crosby or that's it. Well, can I tell you something? God's still writing music, right? He's still inspiring people to write music other than Fran Crosby, although she wrote a lot of great hymns. There's a lot of great hymns that Fran Crosby wrote. But God's still touching people to write music, to praise and worship music. So, there's a lot of people that's like, we're not going to do that at Vacation Bible School. We've never done it that way. Well, maybe it's time to do it that way, right? So that's what it's about, right? It's about going about being His business. It's about including rather than excluding. It's about kingdom work and a kingdom purpose. There's a lot of times that we hide our light, and it's because that we don't want to be labeled. Something that we don't want to carry around as a label, right? See that's big today. People label everything, label everybody. And there's a lot of times that we don't want to be labeled. We don't want to do this. We don't want to offend anybody, right? Well, every time I turn on the news, they don't care to offend me, right? They don't care to offend you as a Christian. But we don't want to offend anybody. So we kind of sit back and we sit to the side and we're off to the sideline and we're scared of what it may lead to, that it may turn to some suffering, may lead to some type of suffering. I don't know. God may never call you to die for Him, but He did call you to live for Him. And that's what we got to remember, right? We got to remember that He calls us to live for Him. He didn't call us to back down. He didn't call us to sit on the sideline. He doesn't call us to do those things, but He calls us to be bold. He tells us to be bold, and God tells us in Hebrews 13, He says, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and that I will not fear what man shall do unto me. Because why? Because God is my helper. Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 2, he says, but though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. So what Paul's saying, he's saying, hey, whenever I came into this city, they didn't greet me and say, hey, Paul, we got a room for you over at the Holiday Inn Express, and we're going to put you up, and then we're going to take you out, and we're going to feed you, and we're just glad to see you. We're glad that you came to do this mission work. He says, it wasn't like that. He says, whenever I showed up, guess what? They didn't treat me very good. He said there was a lot of suffering then. I was shamefully treated. And we know that Paul went through all kinds of things. That he was beaten, he was shackled, he was in prison. So we see that he says, but in the midst of all that conflict, that he was able to declare, he had boldness in our God to declare the gospel of God. In the midst of all that conflict. Why? He said, I know who's in control. That's what Paul was saying. He said, I know who's in control. I know that God's got my back. And it should be the same for us. There's a lot of times that we forget that, as he told us in Hebrews 12, he says, we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witness. He says, let us lay aside every weight that hinders us, that clings to us so closely, and let's run the race with endurance. He says, looking into the author and the finisher of our faith. So he's saying, hey, focus upon, I want you to know that there's a great cloud of witnesses that's about you, that they're looking down and they're cheering you on. And if you've ever competed in anything, I used to do some half marathons. And we would go and we would compete, and I knew that I couldn't win these, right? But my daughters thought that Dad's going to come in first place, because in our kids' eyes, we're different, right? So, but for just to finish, right? It's just to finish. But my daughters would always do something. They would make up their little cardboard signs, and they would be at the finish line. And after you've ran 13 miles, and to hear a familiar voice cheering you on, right? Something happens. Something takes place in your body. So the pain that once endured your body, the adrenaline kicks in. And you no longer focus upon the pain, but you're focused upon the finish. And you can see it's just within sight. And God's telling us, He says, hey, you're surrounded by such a great cloud of witness. He says, I know this world's tough, and Jesus told us it was going to be tough, right? He says, there's going to be trials and tribulations. He said, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. I've overcome the world. So he says, even when you're running your race, he said, I want you to know there's others who's already ran the race. They're cheering you on. They're saying, you can do it. You can make it. The finish line is in sight. Don't lose focus. Let your light shine. Let your light shine. We've got to remember that Jesus was bold for you. He was bold for me. Is it too much to ask that I be bold for Him, that you be bold for Him? As He was bold for us on Calvary's cross. Well, what does it look like for our light to shine? How do you become that beacon of hope? It's simple. It's simple. It's really easy to be that beacon of hope, or to be that light. It's to be like Jesus. Because the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself in love. There's a lot of times that we get hung up thinking that we can't do it. We get hung up thinking there's no way. I don't have the resources. I can't do it. We think that I can't be the light in the dark world. And you're right, you can't on your own. That's why it's important that we stay connected. Jesus told us in John 15, He says, I am the vine and you are the branches, right? He that abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. So you can't do it on your own. You got to stay connected to the vine. You got to stay connected to the one who's given you the strength. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overcomplicate it. There's a lot of things that we think that we can't do. God's given each and every one of you the ability to do something that can bless someone else. I share this with you, not bragging, but I just share it with you so it kind of gives you an idea, because a lot of times we need ideas, right? We need to hear, what does that look like? Well, here's what it looks like. There was a widow lady in our community, and she had ran into some problems with her automobile, and it's going to cost several $100s to get it fixed. And whenever you're on a fixed income, that's a big deal, right? So I'm a pretty good demo guy, all right? I can tear it apart. And I'll do a lot of my own mechanicing work. And I called a friend of mine who is an ASE certified mechanic. And it's always good to have a certified mechanic who's your friend, right? So, because when you get it tore apart and you got extra parts in your hand, you're thinking, I don't remember where that goes. He usually knows where it goes. So I called him up. I gave him the situation, what was going on, and he says, I'll be glad to come over and help you. I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. We got her car, and we tore it apart, we fixed it, and gave it back to her. It's simple things like that. It's simple things like that. We had a guy show up at our church one Wednesday night. We like to hang around afterwards and talk, and sometimes my wife likes to hang around a lot longer than I do and talk. But we were there, and I'm going around. I'm just locking the doors, right? Getting everything locked up. Our pastor, he was gone that night. He asked if I would take care of the services. So I'm getting everything shut down and locked up, and coming back, and I come through this side door, and I hear somebody knocking on the back door. I'm like, I must have locked one of the kids out. So I go back, and I unlock, and there's this guy standing there at the back door, and he's got his bibbed overalls. He's ready for work, so what's going on? He's got his bibbed overalls on. He says, hey, is Brother Adam here? I said, no, he's not here. Something I can help you with. He said, man, I got a job in Louisville at the Ford plant, and I don't have enough gas to get there, and I was wondering if you could if I could get some gas to make it to Louisville. And I said, well, we're getting ready to leave. If you just drive down to the gas station down there, be glad to put some gas in your car, right? So we did. We drove down to the gas station. I filled his car up for him and said, hey, be safe. God bless you. Get along, right? Hope you get up to Louisville. So he takes off, and some of you are saying, what if he's scamming you, right? Because that's what goes off in our mind. We're thinking, what if this person's scamming us? Well, here's what I'm going to share with you. You think whenever Jesus fed the 5,000, every one of them was there to follow him? Huh? Whenever Jesus said all these 5,000 and he broke the fish and the bread and he blessed it, he didn't exclude anybody, did he? He fed them all. It would have been awesome if every one of them were there to follow him, but the truth of the matter is they weren't. Not all of them were there to follow him and take part of his ministry. Some of them were there just to see what he was going to do. Some of them were there just to see who he was going to heal, what kind of a miracle he was going to perform. So they all wasn't there for the right reason. So what am I telling you? I'm telling you they scammed Jesus, and he knew it, right? He knew it. So will you get scammed? Yeah, you'll get scammed. But it's going to be all right, because Jesus said this. He says, here's what he tells us. As you did to the one of the least of these,